Masura say, Murie Zimbabwe, and thank you for joining us on Nehanda TV. My guest today is the former Energy and Power Development Minister, Mr. Elton Mangoma. He, of course, now is the president of the Renewal Democrats of Zimbabwe. Mr. Mangoma, thank you for joining us on Nehanda TV.
Thank you for the invitation.
Of course, our viewers will remember the fact that you are a former Deputy Treasurer General in the Movement for Democratic Change led by Morgan Tsvangirai. So let's start there. Your reasons for leaving the party in summary.
Well, as you know, I did raise issues with Mr. Morgan Tsvangirai about how the party had lost its way and that certain issues needed to be resolved. I followed that up with a letter to make sure that what we had discussed was on record, and he didn't like it. And as a result, he organized people to beat me up, and finally he succeeded in having me chased away from the party. That's how I left.
Some will say to you, leaders are elected every 5 or so years at a Congress, and that by writing a letter you were seeking to subvert the constitutionally mandated way of selecting leaders. Should you not have left that to the generality of the MDC leadership to decide who their president is?
Well, the issue is that when the formation of the MDC, everybody knew that there was a 2-term limit, which issue was then altered. So we're beginning to run away from the founding principles and values. And certainly that what I was asking him was not for me to replace him, but for simply making sure that he would go and occupy a founding president, and that the party would be given a new impetus as opposed to carrying on a path which certainly in my own view and the view of many of the colleagues who are still there was taking the party into a cul-de-sac, and it required to be renewed and to have a new narrative, as we called it at that time.
Yeah, but the question still remains, is that not something that the generality of the party should have determined? Because it sounds rather an elitist approach that senior officials seek to dictate which way the party should go.
No, the reason why there are senior officials is precisely to bring censure to whoever will be leading it, because the issue is being a team, and people must be able to talk collectively, as opposed to simply leaving it to the generality of the people. And because what happens is, when you have formed a team, everybody expects that the people who are closest to the president are actually his advisors and should be able to advise accordingly. And if we fail to advise, then it means that we are not doing our job and just therefore not be able to occupy a senior position.
But when the MDC constitution was altered, you did not raise any objections. Does it not sound rather opportunistic that you should only say this because you have now fallen out with Mr. Morgan Tsvangirai?
No, at that point I actually had not fallen out with him at all. So what I wrote and asking him to occupy a different position was not because I had actually fallen out with him. In fact, I was trying to preserve his legacy, because what had happened is now public knowledge, is that there were many serious omissions that had been done that people would otherwise are now talking about, which otherwise they wouldn't have to talk about. The issues of his performance in government, for instance, was an issue that needed to have arisen, and so many other issues, including issues of not properly handling finances. So all these matters really required to be handled sensitively, as opposed to now putting it in the public domain.
You since went on, of course, to break away from the MDC led by Tsvangirai to form the MDC Renewal team with your former colleague, Mr. Tendai Biti. You've again fallen out with Mr. Biti to form your own party, and your critics say that is a pattern that shows you are power hungry and only interested in leading your own party.
That in fact is more to the contrary, because those gentlemen know that the issues we wanted corrected are principles and values. We need to have an organization that is set on principles and values that we follow, irrespective of an individual. And therefore, even today, if I proclaim some principles and values and I fail to live by those principles and values, it should be honorable for me to leave that position and someone else to take, because when you are going out to the public, you are posturing and you are telling people something. And for some of us, we believe that what we tell people is what we must do. We should not be able to indicate left and turn right. We should be able to say, we want to go left and turn left. And unfortunately, we will then see that there are very few people who want to follow principle and values. And that's where the issues then begin to arise.
A lot of people say the reason why you left the MDC Renewal team, which is now called PDP, was in fact the adultery allegations that you faced. And the point has been raised that you spoke at length about Morgan Tsvangirai's womanizing, and yet a few months after speaking out loudly about that, you found yourself being accused of sleeping with another man's wife.
Well, that is what I call a red herring, because in fact it never happened. And indeed, this is one case that actually found its way to the courts, where they were supposed to prove, and there was no proof that was proffered. And therefore, it's the good thing is that we all took it to the courts and found that there was absolutely no evidence. What it was meant was to be able to sway me from sticking to the principles that we were speaking about. And the reasons for our separation are very clear. One, that they become violent, the same violence that we had run away and condemned from ZANU-PF and run away and condemned from MDC-T had already found its way, and Tendai Biti was beginning to use violence as well. The second issue was that we talk about democracy. Let the people choose the leadership that they want. This is what we demand in this country. So when we demand that and we call ourselves democratic, we should be able, the minimum we can do is to give ourselves to the people so that the people can exercise their choice. And indeed, as RDZ, we have held our own Congress, attended by 2,000 people, and there were elections of senior management people. And these are the democratic principles we want people to live with, to live by. And when people don't want that, then you can see that you are indicating left and turning right. My colleagues did not want to have a Congress, and indeed they proceeded to have something else where no elections were done. So that was the second reason. The third reason was a question of whether they wanted to work with People First, Maim Juru and Didmas Mtasa. And some of us felt, no, absolutely not, because People First is exactly the same as ZANU-PF, and in fact, these people who are now calling themselves People First, it's still ZANU People First, and therefore their DNA, their thoughts, the way of life is exactly the same as ZANU-PF. There is no difference in principle, there is no difference in values, there is no difference in ideology. What is different is they are no longer on the feeding trough and they want to go back on the feeding trough. And for us, that was a no-no, because when people were being murdered in Zimbabwe, they were there in leadership, some of them taking prominent positions. about it. When people were being amputated and short sleeve and long sleeve, they were the ones perpetrating it. When people's houses were being burnt, they were the ones at the forefront of it. When there was Muramba Trina, they were the ones at the forefront of it. They never said a word. And now suddenly, because they are not on the feeding trough, they now want to be able to look democratic. For us, it is not yet time to live with, to work with those people.
But the problem is, in 2009, you went into a coalition government with people who basically fit that description, who were responsible for the murder and terrorization of the general populace. So how different, are you not being a hypocrite there? I mean, you are willing to work with Mugabe, but you are not willing to work with Mamjuru.
It's actually very different, because a government of national unity is different from working as parties, because parties remain and keep their own identities. So to actually say, because you worked with ZANU-PF in a GNU, now we should be able to work with ZANU-PF, it's actually very, very, what can I say? It's actually doesn't make sense, because for you, in a government of national unity, you are trying to compromise, and at this stage, these are they are not in government, and why should we compromise with them?
Okay, now the problem that the opposition has faced, obviously, in Zimbabwe is the one of fragmentation. 2005, the party split into two factions. We had Tsvangirai on one side, Welshman Mugabe. A few years later, the party splits again. Tendai Biti and you and other colleagues form a renewal team. Renewal team splits. You form the Renewal Democrats of Zimbabwe. They changed name to PDP. We did one time Job Sikala with his MDC-99. Atham Tambara, when he fell out with Welshman Mugabe, had his own faction. It's a million MDC factions. Do you see the problem that arises that people do not, in the end, take you seriously because of this fragmentation?
I think more to the contrary. People are very clear that they want a leadership that they can trust. And for what I have checked, the parties that are registered with ZEC at the moment, there are over 40. But people know the parties that they can trust, they know the leadership that they can trust. And that's why you find that when there is an election, very few of the parties participate, or people support very few of those. So really the issue is not about the fragmentation, it's to try and build a team that will serve the people and not be able to simply be in the opposition for the sake of saying Mugabe must go and step in Mugabe's shoes and do exactly the same, if not worse. So we are traveling on a path of transformation, not a path to power. If it's simply a question of a path to power, you might as well give Robert Mugabe a ring and join him. But for us, we want Zimbabwe to be transformed so that all the people of Zimbabwe begin to enjoy their lives in Zimbabwe. And once there is leadership that has got the same values and principles, it is easy to work with that. And indeed, when you look at what the MDC was before we went into the inclusive government, there were some well-meaning people who were in there, but when we were in government, a few of our colleagues were tainted, and therefore the same things that we were accusing ZANU-PF of began to live the same life as ZANU-PF. So they became corrupt, they spent too much, they were interested in the power and forgot the people. So these contradictions happened when we were in government, and indeed there was need to correct that so that people can see that there is a difference between ZANU-PF and any outfit that intends to replace it, and simply not be able to change the names but have people who behave exactly the same as ZANU-PF.
A direct question for you, Mr. Mangoma. Do you think you have sufficient support to have an impact on the political scene? I cite here examples that have been put out there on social media, pictures of rallies that you have conducted, and You seem to be struggling for numbers, they say.
Well, it depends what you want to judge people with. We call them meetings, you call them rallies. We certainly have not held a rally, not a single rally. In fact, we hold meetings, and our meetings are held in close knit so that we actually exchange ideas, as opposed to rallies where people are used to be told things by leadership and then leave. So we listen, we discuss. These are dialogue platforms. We are doing it differently from other people, and we can be able to say, we have had our own Congress, where we have had the leadership in structures come across the country, and we had 2,000 of our senior members attend a Congress, which proves that we have the structures out there, and indeed, very clearly that most of those people were far and wide and from rural areas. So we know we are having the impact that we feel we should have, and it's up to people to judge us. And we are not trying to have a rally where we can show number of force at all. This is not the time. This is the time for us to build and to reach out, to listen to what the people are saying, and to implement the kind of things that people want to see.
There has been a lot of talk about a coalition of opposition forces to fight ZANU-PF in 2018. Do you see a situation where in future you'll ever work with Morgan Tsvangirai and the MDC-T?
Well, as I have said, we want to be value and principle driven. Once people want to subscribe to principles and values, we will be able to work with them, because it's not about who we work with, it's what we can do together to achieve it. But certainly, if people don't follow the principles and values, and we don't share the same principles and values, we will not work with those people. So we have already picked up people first and say we don't have the same values and principles, and therefore we can't work with them. So we don't necessarily see ourselves in a coalition with them, but there could be people who share the same values and principles, and we'll be very clear about that for us to be able to work with them. So people can repent, but as of now, as long as Tsvangirai is behaving the way he is behaving, we don't see any room to work with him. But I've said it before, we don't have a problem with the institution of the MDC, but we certainly think that the leadership is not following the principles and the values as enshrined in that constitution.
Well, Zimbabwe, that was the former Energy and Power Development Minister, Mr. Elton Mangoma, who now leads the Renewal Democrats of Zimbabwe, an opposition party that came out after he, of course, left what was known as the MDC Renewal team, now called PDP. For your time, we thank you, Mr. Mangoma.
Thank you very much.